Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. In this video, we will be presenting two topics, Islamic rates and one of the Islamic derivatives option. Now let's take a look at the first topic.
Do you guys know what is i-Reits? i-Reits is an abbreviation for the words Islamic Real Estate Investment Trust. i-Reits can be defined as a collective investment scheme in real estate which the tenants operate permissible activities that comply with Sharia and not relate with any provision activities like financial services based on interest, gambling, and more. There are 4 things that need to be followed in order for REITs to be Sharia compliant. First is utilization of the real estate must be Sharia compliant. Second, financing of the acquisition or development of the real estate should be Sharia compliant. Third, investment of cash or liquidity must be made in Sharia compliance instrument. And lastly, insurance scheme for protecting the real estate should also be Sharia compliant, which is takaful. Next, let me tell you guys the characteristic of i-Reits. First is affordable. Second is receiving dividend in the form of rental income from tenants. Third is long-term investment. Fourth is involve rentals properties like house and building. Fifth, tenant must operate Sharia compliance activities. Sixth is low-risk investment and usually property values do not depreciate especially if there are facilities around it. Seventh is liquid and lastly is affordable stable income stream.
For the types of REITs, it has 4 types. On the first type of REITs is equity REITs, where they own and operate income-producing real estate. They also developing, leasing, and providing building management and tenant services. Also can generate income after acquiring the building through rental. The second REITs is mortgage REIT, where they lend money to real estate owners and operators. The third REIT is hybrid REITs, where it's a combination of equity and mortgage REIT. And the fourth REITs is tapered REITs, which include 2 or more separate entities tapered together to trade using a single new financial instrument.
Structure in i-Reit involves 7 participants. First, investor will buy the i-Reit from a company and investor through holding of units will gain dividend as their return. Net income then will be gained accordingly from the activities done in the properties. Note that the activities carried out must be Sharia compliant and i-Reit require real estate as it pools of assets. Fund manager will administer i-Reit instrument and documentation processes which it is expected to result of the best return in the form of dividend for the investors. Investors are obligated to pay the management fee, which will be deducted from the dividend earned later on. There is also trustee in the structure, which will act as custodian of the fund invested, and trustee fee will also be charged to the investors. Sharia advisor include Sharia committee will be advising on the matter pertaining to Sharia to ensure all instruments involved are permissible in the eyes of Sharia, and investor will also be charged. Other than that, property manager will provide the maintenance and the management services of real estate involved and charge the investor a fee for that services. Lastly, the tenant will pay the rental for using the property in conducting activities which the rental will be a net income for the property and eventually becomes a return to the investors.
These are the differences between conventional REITs and Sharia-compliant REITs. The first difference is the existence of Sharia committee. Conventional REITs will have no Sharia committee to prohibit the non-permissible activities, but for i-Reits, there is the Sharia committee to ensure compliance with Sharia requirements. Second is financing. So for conventional REITs, there is no restriction. However, financing of the development in i-Reits should be Sharia compliant. These are the Sharia guidelines highlighted by Securities Commission which must be followed when conducting Sharia-compliant assessment REITs. First is non-permissible rental activities. Rental is the major income for the investors so it must come from halal and allowable sources and not involved in riba, gambling or any non-halal activities. Next is the rental from tenant who carries out mixed activities. Sharia allowed the mixed activities where the non-permissible does not exceed 20% of the total turnover of Islamic REITs. Next guideline is the technique of calculating the ratio of rental of non-permissible. There will be few approaches used for the non-permissible activities such as utilization of space occupied, hours of services, and etc. These are determined by the Sharia advisor. It can be used to calculate the ratio of rental of non-permissible activities to total rental paid by the tenant. The next one is the acquisition of real estate, where it is agreed for non-permissible activities below 20% of the total turnover of Islamic REITs. Besides that, for renting out to a new tenant, they must not involve in non-permissible activities. Next is the instruments used in investment, deposit and financing for Islamic REITs. This is to make sure that the instruments used are based on Sharia principles. Next one is the takaful coverage. It is obliged to employ takaful schemes to insure their real estate. Lastly is the risk management, where the Islamic REITs are allowed to take part in forward sales or purchases of currency for risk management purposes and is encouraged to deal with Islamic financial institutions.
Moving on to the last section in this chapter, which is the advantages of investing in Islamic real estate investments trust. The first one is the real estate investments trusts are fairly liquid and can be sold off fairly to raise cash to take advantage of other investment opportunities. Moreover, retail investors with a small funds can diversify holdings in various geographical and types of real estate investment. Furthermore, tax benefit in taxable jurisdiction and other government incentives to promote property trust to encourage retail investors to access professionally managed shares of real estate. Next, tax-free jurisdiction can attract foreign investors. Also, in most markets, property increase faster than inflation rates, which can provide a better inflation hedge compared to other asset classes. Last one, Islamic real estate investment trusts have lower correlation to equities compared to other asset classes and automatically provide a portfolio stability to investors with an active asset allocation strategy. We have come to the end of this chapter. Thank you for your kind attention during watching this video and have a good day.
Now let's move on to the second topic in this video, Islamic derivative, which is option.
Hello everyone, let's learn about products of Islamic derivative, which is option. Option is a financial instrument that convey a right but not an obligation to engage in a future transaction on some underlying securities or in the futures contract. But the usage of option structure that have been engineered for risk management purposes for currency exchange is not universal. And the banks that allow using the structure is upon the approval of their Sharia Advisory Board. There is two structures that have been developed using wa'ad, and the fee is paid in both structures, which is in commodity murabaha or tawaru, and also direct payment of fees. In Malaysia, the fee that is directly paid for the wa'ad is prohibited, but the charges is usually factored in the structure.
Let's start off with the first section in Islamic option, which is wa'ad and commodity murabaha. We have to understand that foreign exchange wa'ad is a structure that is quite similar to the conventional option. In foreign exchange wa'ad and commodity murabaha, on the start date of the transaction, the Islamic bank will undertake wa'ad or promise to the investors to exchange currency 1 to the currency 2 at pre-agreed rate on a future date. Furthermore, on the same date, the Islamic bank will execute a commodity murabaha contract where the payment is paid on spot. Also, the Islamic bank received a fee from the investor for its undertaking. Moving on to the foreign exchange wa'ad and commodity murabaha, in the case of wa'ad is exercised. On the maturity date, the investor might ask the bank to fulfill its promise or release the bank from its undertaking. In the maturity date also, if the investor wants to execute wa'ad, the bank and investor will exchange the currencies Not to mention, the fee will go to the bank whether or not the investor exercised the promise.
Next structure in option is function wa'ad with fee. The bank, after undertake to the investor to exchange currency 1 against currency 2, the bank will receive a fee from the investor for its undertaking. The investor on the future date might ask the bank to fulfill its promise or might release the bank from its undertaking. Once the contract reaches the maturity date, if the investor wants to execute the wa'ad, the bank and the investor will exchange the currencies. The objective of this contract is to allow investor to wait and see whether the wa'ad is more favorable or less favorable than the prevailing market rate. With condition, the investor is required to pay a fee for the wa'ad. In Malaysia, this structure which the fee is directly paid for the wa'ad is prohibited. However, charges are usually factored in the structure, which it is in line with the view of the majority of ulama who opine that unilateral binding wa'ad without any consideration was permissible in a forward currency transaction.